ndichakudanyangwe unevende tichaenda tese kuchiweshe tigotamba tese zvikende ndichakudanyangwe unevende tichaenda tese kuchiweshe tigotamba tese zvikende break the ice just like Titanic we're singing so deep yeah. Break the ice keep it short through the ice just like Titanic we're singing so deep yeah. Wait yeah. Shining day, you were the queen of the throne, yeah. You will be my one, you will be the sun shining day, you will be the queen of the throne, yeah. Break the ice, keep it short to the heart, just like Titanic, we're singing so deep. Break the ice, keep it short to the heart, just like Titanic. Oh, I'm risking a wheelchair to be with you. Your daddy won't be happy to see me with you. Your eyes, diamond, the treasure he has been saving for life. He who had to lose that to a fellow musician with a cowboy making music in the south side, who believed that the king's daughter will be his love for life. It's our my one and only, my South African queen, you the that I breathe.
Recording in progress.
Oh, Sarafina, oh, my one and only, my South African dream, you the that I breathe. Oh, my melanin, beautiful fantasy, a world of wonder every man will always wish to see. I believe that I go just living inside and don't know who's there, I won't don't be on me. Oh, Sana, love you on me. He's on my now and our knees on yeah. Sarafina, oh my one and only, my South African queen, you hear that I breathe. Oh Sarafina, oh my one and only, my South African queen, you hear that I breathe.
Okay, guys, that was the Heavy Chef song, in case you didn't know. I could see you guys going, oh, duh. Okay, so that was the Heavy Chef song. And by the way, all the music you've been hearing tonight has been written by one of our community members, Mr. Divine Mahara, who might actually be patching in tonight. He's a very, very gifted singer, songwriter, entrepreneur in his own right, and he works out of Greyton in the Western Cape. And I encourage everybody and all the people online who are patching in just to check out Divine Mahara. He's just an unbelievable talent. And he obviously wrote all the songs for our learning platform. So for everybody who are patching in online and all the socials and on YouTube, welcome to you guys. And welcome to everybody in the audience. I'm really, really happy to see this amazing crowd tonight and just get a sense of people in real life and not behind the screen and so on and so forth. So it's wonderful to see you guys who actually made it here tonight, and welcome to all the people patching in. There's a few people from overseas, international, and it's great to start these events again and really kind of get the community going. So for those of you who don't know Heavy Chef, we're a learning platform for entrepreneurs. Our core belief is that entrepreneurs can change the world for the better. We aim to inspire people to start new businesses. I know there's a couple of you tonight who are baby entrepreneurs who are starting their businesses. So welcome to this very tortuous path. And we also aim to empower you along the way. So that's what our learning platform is about. And if those of you who have not signed up yet, go to heavychef.com. You can sign up for free, and there's thousands of videos on the platform, including our two speakers tonight, talking about everything from starting a business to scaling a business to selling a business. And we have a couple of other heavy chefs in the crowd tonight, which I'm super stoked about. And there's just a lot of learning, a lot of beautiful heavy chefs, as we call them, who are sharing their recipes. And just a quick one on the reason for our name, in case you're wondering if this is a cooking show. It's not. The reason why we call it Heavy Chef is because it comes from the saying, never trust a skinny chef. And essentially what that means is that we want to honor the people who are working in the trenches, who are rolling up their sleeves, who are doing their 10,000 hours, and who are eating their own food. It's essentially a peer-to-peer learning platform where we get people who are doing the things to teach the things to other people who want to do the things. And tonight, we're going to be talking about storytelling. So we got two of my favorite people, Pierre and Lauren, who's going to be patching in from London. And I'm just such a huge fan of both of these amazing South African individuals. Before I welcome Lauren onto the virtual stage, I saw we got a sneak peek. I just want to say, first of all, that there's a bunch of events coming up as well. So if you guys enjoy tonight and the people who are patching in online, go to heavychef.com. You'll see there's a lot more community events that are free to attend and included in your, for those of you who want to come in person, in your membership. In May in Cape Town, there's one in public speaking with Verity Price and Mark Brown, two our current and former world champions of public speaking. So there's quite a lot of nodding of the heads. And Verity is just an incredible talent. The first woman, the sixth woman in history of 80 years of the competition running to actually win the title, and the first person from Africa. So just an amazing achievement for Africa in general. And then just a quick thanks to our partners without whom we would not be able to provide the service and to serve this community. Firstly, just a massive thanks to Payfast and Zero, who've supported us all along the way, right from the beginning. To Ex-Nilo, who we are publishing books with and doing some great work. Digital Planet, We Grow SA, HP Store, Workshop 17. This amazing venue, and a lot of you know Workshop 17, just one of the most incredible companies and communities in the country. Backsburg, we actually have some Backsburg on stage here tonight, which is actually not wine, it's brandy. So it's a Sydney Back brandy. By the way, Lauren, we will get you your brandy. I don't know if you even know if you drink brandy, but we'll get you a bottle of this premium brandy in due course. Sir Fruit, Good Leaf, outside you guys have been enjoying some of the fruits of Sir Fruit and Good Leaf. And then Parcel Ninja, Creed Living, Hala, Black Magic, Massimo, Paul, and Nico doing amazing tech work. By the way, today is the first time that we're actually doing this where we're having multiple streams all streamed at the same time. So I truly hope this is going to go well, because this is it's a really great way of getting a community together. So please do give me feedback as well, by the way. And then Esizayo in Cape Town, Adam Loebser and the whole backstage crew in Cape Town, Eclipse Communication. And then just a special mention to our very latest partner, Capitalize.com, who are an aggregator of alternative finance, just doing amazing work in the entrepreneur space and providing really, really great early stage finance for entrepreneurs and just supporting the entrepreneur sector as a whole. And yeah, I think just again, an encouragement to all of you and everybody online who are joining us, just to engage, to interact, to communicate with each other, to learn from each other, and to really support your peers in this community, because I believe that with all the systemic and endemic changes that we have in this country and this continent, I really do believe that it's you guys and the people within the community that are going to change it. So just love your work and let's stick together, guys. Let's really be a positive light within all of this. So without further ado, I want to introduce, I want to welcome Pierre and Lauren on the virtual stage. Please, can we give both our contributors tonight a huge welcome from Johannesburg? Can we? I've got Paul and Nico running around at the back there, trying to twiddle the knobs, and there we go. Welcome, Lauren. Welcome to Joburg, kinda. So good to have you, and welcome, Pierre. Can we give them a warm, rousing applause? Thank you. Thank you, guys. And Cheapers, it's so great to have us all here and being able to engage with you on, I think, what I believe is actually one of the most underestimated, but yet most important topics that we can possibly engage upon, and that is storytelling. And I think, many of you have seen the bios, and I'm not going to go too much into who these two individuals are, but Lauren, is just such an outstanding talent in the South African community and just written so many great books. I'm a huge fan of Lauren's work, just particularly for her wordplay and her kind of verbal gymnastics and the creativity that she brings into her novels and the writing, the short stories, and everything that she does. And I'm just so freaking proud of the work that she's doing, particularly now that she's going to be, her work is going to translate into a major series on Apple Plus. And then Pierre, who is not only a mate of mine, a friend, but somebody who's very active in the community, Chief Learning Officer at CoachBit, which is just one of the most exciting startups in the South African community, and he's doing great work. And he's also a published author. He's won awards for his work, and just is just a really great voice and a sound mind. And by the way, those of you who are on the platform, please do go check out both Lauren and Pierre's recipes and just go through them, because they're both absolutely brilliant. So, without further ado, I'm going to have a sip of brandy after all that talking. I've got a bunch of questions. I did ask the community before this just for some questions, and I've popped in a few myself. But I want to ask, and let's kick off with Lauren, actually. I see Paul's running and jumping back and forth in the back there. But I want to kick off with you, Lauren, just with regards to your love of storytelling, and I want to know where that came from. And by the way, I'm going to ask you the same question, Pierre, so you can prep for that. So where did your love of storytelling come from, Lauren?
it came from reading stories when I was a kid. I was really into Greek mythology and fairy tales, and I was 5 years old when I found out that making up stories was a job that you could have. And since then, I've been completely sold. It's all I've ever wanted to be from the time I was 5 years old. And it's been quite liberating, I think, to have that kind of clarity. Not exactly what I thought it would be like as a 5-year-old. There seems to be much more hard work and loneliness and sitting, typing and retyping and self-doubt than I would have anticipated, but yeah.
Just a quick addendum to that question. Did you grow up with, and this is actually something I've read quite a lot in entrepreneurial stories about entrepreneurs. Did you grow up with a lot of books around you in your household?
Yeah, I did. So my mom was really into fantasy and comics. I got my sex education from Barbarella. And my dad was really into science fiction. So I had a really nice mix of stuff. The house was full of books. And I just want to take a moment to give a shout out to an amazing South African NGO which provides books to under 5s. It's called Book Dash. And their dream is that every kid by the age of 5 should have 100 books of their own. So yeah, it's a really lovely charity to support, which I also support separately.
That's amazing. Book Dash.
Yeah.
And I will put it in the show notes after this when we distribute that. That's amazing. Thank you. And by the way, the research is super clear that the more books that you have in your formative years, the more it contributes to your creativity and innovation at a later stage.
I think also it makes parents and parents who like buy books and value that kind of thing as well. So I think there's a lot of nurture there as well. You can't just buy physical books and have them in the house. You need someone who's telling you stories, who's engaging with you, who's kind of helping grow your imagination.
Pierre, from your side, where did your love, I mean, you have a clear zeal and a passion for storytelling. Where did that originate from?
That's a good question. I was trying to think now where it came from originally. But my background is in anthropology and reading a bunch of ancient texts and theology. And I think at one point, I can't remember when, but I sort of realized that all of our ancient stories, our myths and legends and religions are all told in stories. And these stories tend to change people's lives for the better, mostly. And that started to fascinate me, and I started to dig into it deeper and deeper and deeper, and found this love for story, and been exploring it ever since. And it's so cool that Lauren actually mentioned Book Dash, because she introduced me to Book Dash a couple of years ago, and we since printed, I think, about 10,000 books of them, which is really great. And we could give it to a bunch of kids in and around Cape Town. So, yeah, story changes lives, and that's where my love for it comes from.
Thank you. And I mean, I know from my own personal experience, my parents, I was very fortunate that my parents did actually nurture my love of stories by reading to me as a kid Asterix and Obelix and Tintin and all that kind of stuff. And it's just such beautiful memories for me. But I do genuinely believe that I still have that love for books because of those early experiences. Lauren, I want to segue back to you, and it's such an obvious question, but it's such a clearly exciting time for you and for us, just watching the progress. How's the launch going? Can you give us a bit of an insight into the welcome everybody? Just give us a bit of an insight into how's it going. I mean, just for reference for everybody watching this, The Shining Girls has an absolutely stellar cast. It's got such a great production team and such an amazing team backing it. And I mean, it obviously is a big thing for South Africa as a whole. But give us an insight as to behind the curtain.
Well, first off, I want to say it's taken since 2013, when the book was optioned, to actually get to this point. And most books that get optioned for film deals, you get some free money at the beginning and nothing ever happens. The average is 10 years, so I think we've kind of squeaked in just under. But yeah, it wouldn't have happened without Elizabeth Moss coming on board. We had a bunch of different scripts that we'd been through over the years, a really passionate team at Leonardo DiCaprio's Appian Way and MRC. who are kind of working together on the project and really trying to get it out there and get it made. But it was only when Elizabeth Moss came on and had such a passion for the book and the character, and obviously a different vision for the character because Elizabeth Moss is older than Kirby is in the book. So I think, and they got this amazing showrunner involved, Silke Louisa, who's this young woman who wrote just the most amazing scripts, and we chatted a lot in the beginning. I sent her a bunch of my research materials and introduced her to some of the people I'd spoken to, like Chicago police officers and journalists who worked at the Chicago Sun-Times. So it's different to the book, but I think it is so true to the heart of the book, and that's so exciting for me because it really just captures what I was trying to do in a slightly different way. And I think as kind of parallel companion pieces, it's really beautiful. They share the same bloody heart. They have the same passions. It's fundamentally about trauma and what it does to us and how reality shifts under you when you've been through something traumatic, which I think is probably something, unfortunately, a lot of South Africans can relate to. And the cast is amazing. I'm so thrilled. And God, Fred, there are lines of dialogue I wish I'd written. I'm actually quite mad.
So you're actually saying, you're the one saying, I wish I'd written that. That's amazing.
Well, not all of it, but some lines of dialogue. I think some parts of the book are better.
And just out of interest, when can we expect it, just for everybody watching this, to go live on Apple Plus?
The first 3 episodes drop on Apple Plus on Friday the 29th, so that's next Friday. Please go and get a trial Apple subscription. Please don't pirate it. I know it's like being in South Africa. I know piracy is easy and fun, but please, let's support the arts and try and get more South African stories highlighted and made.
So crew, you know what to do. Let's make this happen. Let's trend this, baby. I think, again, it's just so flippin' exciting. And by the way, I hope you use my photographs from the shoot. I'm hoping Apple dig those pics. So Pierre, just another little side note is Pierre writes a sometimes daily emailer. It's supposed to be a daily mailer, but it's a daily mailer, and it's one of the best daily mailers that I've read. I've recommended to so many people, and a lot of people who are watching this right now know that I've sent it to you guys. And I encourage everybody to sign up to Pierre's daily mailer. It's just his thoughts. I don't know. I think I'd like you to maybe explain it a bit better. Well, let's start with that. I mean, tell us about your daily mailer.
Well, my daily sometimes mailer is just a rambling of my. It's actually started as a sort of a journal that I started keeping about just things that I'm thinking about. And then I started putting them onto my blog, and then started emailing them to people, and it sort of grew from there. So it's sort of a sometimes daily mailer. It was random thoughts on design, life, philosophy, human development.
And it's just, in my view, it's just a lot of emailers are these long rambling kind of things. Pierre's is like one paragraph or a couple of lines, and I mean, as Lauren will testify, and anybody here who writes, to get a lot of thoughts into a short space. The art of brevity is one of the hardest things in the world. So, Pierre manages to do that consistently, and it's such a gift. I'm envious of that. But you're also a writer of long books, and I know you have one coming out. So can you tell us a little bit about that book and and the blood, sweat, and tears that it's taken to
blood, sweat, and tears. It's easy to write. You just sit and bleed, right? So it was Ernest Hemingway that said that. But so my book. I mean, I don't know if it's always relevant to this audience, but it's a book on faith, or actually losing your faith. So this journey that we often, many South Africans, most South Africans grow up in a sort of religious context, religious household, and then after a while you start questioning, you start thinking about things and wondering, what am I truly experiencing, what is real, what is true. And the book is sort of trying to be a guide in that journey, to come alongside somebody and help deconstruct and facilitate. I've tried to write it in a way that it doesn't give answers. It's not this apologetic, like this is the right way and this is the wrong way. It's about, yes, I can see that you're questioning. I can see that you you're at this stage in your story, really, because it's that. I mean, that happens in every story where a character, and we all are heroes in our own story. So when a character comes to a place of confusion or distrust or this sort of inciting incident, something that happens to them that they have to go through and now wrestle through. And that's sort of what the book tries and addresses, which is just for me, such a wide and important topic, something that's so fundamental to so many of our lives. So, yeah.
And just quickly, when's it coming out?
In August, and it's in Afrikaans, so sorry.
But he'll translate it.
Because that's funny.
That's the easy part. I'm joking. I know Pierre well enough to know that he has translated a book before, and I think that was more like self-sadomasochism rather than bleeding.
Never again.
Yeah. So Lauren, I want to go back to you and just. I mean, this is a fairly broad and basic and overview, a sort of overall question, but I suppose why should the general population care about the art and the craft of stories? I mean, if you're not a sort of, I guess, an author or a creative, why should we care?
Because stories are how we understand who we are in the world. We tell ourselves stories about each other, about ourselves all the time. If you're the kind of person like, oh, why does this always happen to me? I got in a car crash today and they pranked my side mirror. That's a story that you're telling yourself, and that's kind of helping to define who you are. It's how you put stuff in context. But we engage with storytelling like we are storytelling animals. It's how we understand our enemies. It's how we understand what's going on in the world. I think the rise of fake news is a particularly terrifying and poisonous kind of storytelling. And I think QAnon and, all the Russian propaganda and that stuff catches on because the people who are spinning those stories know how to tell a really compelling one. And it's one that centers us in the universe where we are the ones who have now found out the secret, that there is a sinister cabal running the world and, pretending that vaccines are good for us, but actually there's no such thing as COVID and we mustn't listen to them. And I think those kind of conspiracies are very sexy and very appealing because you're angry with the world and suddenly you have this narrative where you are one of the select few who is smart enough to understand what's really going on here. And I think that's incredibly harrowing. And obviously the best way to fight back against that is to have really compelling stories in return. But of course, the truth is maybe not as compelling as crazy conspiracy theories.
Sure. There's a whole thread there around story, art, and truth, and in some perspectives, I don't. Maybe it's not the right appropriate time to go here, but it is something for everybody to think about. Is the concept of art and stories being more true about concepts that are difficult to grasp than the sort of so-called facts that are espoused through the media and all that. But look, I want to talk a little bit about the business context of it, because I think we need to have a full event about the media and misinformation and all that. And it is such a harrowing and fascinating topic, frankly. But if we can, Pierre, if you can maybe. Can you talk about potentially a case study or give us an example of how great storytelling works within the business sector? I don't know, perhaps a case study that you know of or something that a company that you've consulted with or.
There's a couple. So storytelling is obviously, like Lauren said, and I can just sort of affirm that it's a map our brain knows. So it's the way we are wired. Like we interpret everything with story. So in business, it makes complete sense then to tell your business's story or the way that you're selling or marketing your business with using story or using the structure of story, because it's like an easy hack almost, because if you do it in the right way. And I think there's a couple of businesses that do it in the right way. Many get it spectacularly wrong. And there's a couple that do it well. Internationally, you've got like the big ones like Apple or Nike or so, and we can all look at them and go, those are really good storytellers. But locally, I think two stand out for me. Yappy Chef, which is a friend of ours as well, Shane and Andrew. And they do it particularly well. They have this way of coming alongside their customer and entering into their customer's story, saying, you're the hero, you're the Yappy Chef, and we'll give you the tools. Like, we give you all the cool, pretty stuff that you need and, to impress your friends and look fancy and whatever. Like this, so they tell that story really well in their social media and the way they run their ads and the way, down to the way they deliver their products. That you are completely the hero of the story. I mean, every one of their products gets delivered as a gift and with a handwritten card. Everybody knows that famous story. And that invites their consumer or their customer into that narrative, and they actually serve their customer that way. So do it in a really spectacular way. And then another South African brand which we've exported is Jan. So who here does not know Jan? So Jan, the famous kind of Michelin star South African Afrikaans chef, right? And his brand, the way that he tells a story, if you go to one of his restaurants, if you go to the restaurant in Twalu or the one in Nice, it's a narrative that you get invited into. And he does it in a spectacular way, and it's a little different than the way Yappy Chef does it or other brands does it. I think maybe we can get to that a little bit later, but there's a difference in the way that luxury brands tell stories versus how other brands tell stories.
I just want to make a quick note here that I'm going to open it up to questions here, but also to the live stream audience, the online audience. First of all, I'm aware that some of the visuals are a little bit blurry, but we're working on that. But please do put your questions in the chat, and then I have my team. I've got my phone precariously balanced on my leg here, and I'll get to your questions in due course, and I'll open it up to the audience just now. But Lauren, I want to ask you about your process. How do you learn in terms of your practice of self-improvement and I suppose within the storytelling context and discipline in your daily, weekly rhythms and routines? Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Sure, but I'd like to just speak to Pierre's point as well with a really good example of storytelling that is not from a brand but from a scientific expedition a couple of years ago. When Homo naledi was discovered up in Johannesburg,
yes.
The way they sold that story was amazing. First of all, it's called the Cave of Stars. It's magnificent. Then we have an all-female team of what they called, I think, cavenauts. So it was women who were small enough to get into the really small spaces. So again, we had another really high-impact story and characters and intrigue there. And when they finally did the reveal, they didn't tell us what they'd found exactly, but they had kind of, black cloth thrown over this display case, and the narrative and the way the story kind of came about was designed to seize the public's imagination. And I'd love to see more of that in the sciences and the arts, and the kind of way we engage with amazing discoveries and amazing things that we're doing in South Africa all the time.
I mean, who doesn't want to go to the cave of frickin' stars, right? So, and hang out with cave notes. I want to go there. But on a serious note, I mean, I think that the truth is we need to be so much better about the way we craft our narrative, particularly for South Africa. I mean, it's such an important part of our brand building and creating the personalities within our context and our community from a business perspective to tell our stories. There are so many amazing stories that people just they want to hear about, right? So Lauren, I mean, thank you for sharing that. But so I mean, just in terms of can you give us a bit of a sneak peek, like a BTS footage of what does life for a international best-selling author look like? Is it all glamorous? And is it all glamorous?
Oh, it's so glamorous. I'm sitting in my messy apartment, and it's normal. I try to have an office. Ooh. Am I unmuted?
You good to go? You good to go?
All right, good. So I try to have an office space. I share an office space with a friend, so I have somewhere to go every day. And I really find that the routine is very important to me, that I get a chance to focus and kind of divide up my day into meaningful time. And so I have a cat. And yeah, I'm hoping to be able to travel again this year. I'm living in London now because there's more opportunity and more access to the world from here. But it's also a matter of just being able to go places. When they were filming The Shiny Girls, I wasn't able to go because of the pandemic, but also, in South Africa we had that incredible lockdown and red listing, we weren't able to fly. And I don't think London's going to have the same kind of problems. Maybe not, we don't know. Certainly Plague Island here, which is another kind of narrative gone wrong. But yeah, it's really just, it's hard and it's lonely, and I've got to sit down in front of a keyboard and force myself to write. And when I get into flow, then it's really wonderful. But the rest of the time, it's like bashing your head against the keyboard until the blood flows.
Okay, so that's the second time we've heard blood in this seemingly sedentary profession of writing and tapping on keys. I mean, I'm going to press a little bit further, Lauren. Why is it, and I'm going to ask you the same question, by the way, why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to tell stories?
Because they have to make sense. Unlike real life, it doesn't have to make sense. You have to, like a story, the meaning has to emerge. There has to be continuity. It has to work towards a really amazing ending. You have to care about the characters, and you have to hold the entire thing in your head the whole time and keep that structure in place and think about all the places it could go and what needs to work for the sake of the story. I have a friend who codes video games, and he says it's very similar to him. Just the coding, it feels like writing a novel where you've got all these narrative strands and you've got to kind of pull everything together and hold it together. And
I mean, Pierre, can you share, Mr. Hemingway, your analogy? Why is it so difficult? I mean, your story is a little bit different to Lauren's, and yet it's still bleeding, right?
Yeah, I think Lauren has the hard job, like writing stories. I write non-fiction. Well, I write religious stories, so it's debatable whether it's non-fiction or fiction. But
please, there's no one from his parish.
Yeah. Please, everybody, keep tithing. Sorry. It's the brandy. It's hard because you have to get, like, it's this weird. Writing is this weird act of sitting in front of this empty page with a cursor, like swearing at you, blinking. And then once you get into it, and it's like Lauren says, you have to force yourself to sit down. And then there's one writer, he actually said it beautifully, I've forgotten his name now. He says, you have to force yourself to write when you are actually as thin as the paper. So when you have nothing, and then when you sit down, and you force yourself, and you sit there for like half an hour and stare at the empty page and just type a bunch of nonsense maybe, and then there's a flow that happens, or some sort of creative process that comes as you write, it happens. So, and in that way you craft the story. There's tips and tricks and ways that you write a story, and a story always has a structure, and there's kind of classic ways to think about story. But it's the act of writing is really an act of faith, like taking a leap of faith.
So I see there's a couple of questions coming in from the audience, but I want to. I mean, if I look at that, like it seems that it's across the board, right? So that it's difficult, but that certainly means that it's also difficult for the business sector, right? So for entrepreneurs, it's also, we tend to just get shit done. We basically go ahead and we, figure out what the problem is and we try and solve it, right? The storytelling malarkey, like what's that all about? Why is it important for entrepreneurs to tell better stories about what they're trying to do? Is it, because it's not just about selling.
Yeah, I obviously also work in business. So, and the trap of being an entrepreneur is often that the easy way out is just make it cheaper. Make it cheaper, make it faster. And that ends up being just a race to the bottom. So if you do the work, and it's hard work, to invite people into a narrative or to join them in their narrative, depending on the type of business you're running, like that differentiates you. And you're entering on a different level with people. And because story is such a powerful thing, it's literally the way our brains are wired. It deserves, or that gives the result or the ROI that you want for the work that you put in to actually get them to join your story or for you to join their story.
So we had another amazing South African creative on our platform, a guy called Dan Mace, who some of you may have heard of. He's one of South Africa's most gifted filmmakers, film directors, and I asked him about this process of. He does a lot of work for businesses, and he does a lot of advertising stuff. And he's won awards across the world, and he's a youngster. I mean, I think he's 28, 29 or so, and he says he struggles all the time with this thing. But the trick that he comes to is just turn the camera on. Just keep going, and I think it speaks to that rhythm and routine, that flow of creativity. You just got to turn it on, and hopefully the muse will catch you, or something will just go. I have a question from the online audience, and it's one of my favorite individuals in the community. It's from Melissa Attree. Hi, Mel. Thanks for patching in. Mel's just a legend in the South African community, and just a PR, and I think a pretty good storyteller herself, and hilarious on Twitter. So please go and follow her. Mel asked the question. She asked, it's fairly easy to share examples of luxury brands and telling stories. They have the budget and the space to do so often. Can you think of any other examples of more accessible South African brands who are doing storytelling well? So I guess that's a question for either Lauren or Pierre. And it's a tough one because I think about that. I can think of maybe Nando's. I thought of Yappy Chef. I think that Discovery are doing a pretty good job of it. But further than that, I don't know, Feel free, Lauren, to put up your hand.
I think if I can interject there, storytelling is really simple. So where I see good examples of it is when the people that provide services to homeowners, like somebody that does gardening services or does plumbing, that they can tell stories in a very, very good way, where they enter into your story. So they see your problem, like got a blocked drain, I can help you. Right? That's a story. Right? So there's a very famous, not a famous, like a infamous kind of truck that goes around Cape Town and says, "We clean your shit." Right? Can I say that? I don't know. Yeah,
it's okay. It's not a family show.
That's such a great story. Like that's such a great story because you're like, oh, okay, that's like when my drain is blocked and all the shit is coming out of the. Like I call those people. And that's a story. We tend to think of stories like these big kind of, Apple or Nike, like those kind of big narratives and those kind of, very grand advertisements. But it's not that. It's sort of identifying a problem, seeing that problem, and then positioning yourself as the helper, the solver, the guide, the wise old wizard or the witch on the mountain or whatever you want to be, like that serves that person. And that's a story. So, and that's what fascinates me. Like there's one, I don't know if it was the local team that did it, or I think it was Energizer, and they had these really great at the checkout points, and I saw it, and I even took a picture of it, where they had a kid with a flashlight underneath the covers going, "We help you see," right? And I was going, "Wow, that's such a great story." Even like load shedding, it ties in like all those things, and it enters into that kid's narrative, like getting batteries for the flashlight. And I was like, that's a great story.
Lauren, do you have anything to add there? I've got a question for you as well, by the way. So if you...
Sure. So I think, we see it in Kickstarters. I recently helped sponsor a young woman called Pierre to get to Juilliard School for an audition in New York. And she just wrote a really beautiful, moving Kickstarter, which is, people shared and contributed to. And she made it through, I think, I'm not sure what the final results were, but she made it through the 2 rounds of auditions. Hopefully be able to pursue her master's at Juilliard in New York, which is amazing. I'm thinking of the app, which is the thing I was so happy to delete when I arrived in London, is, HCOM to Push, which again has a story just in the title is perfect. And then I'm also thinking about some of the DA's problematic messaging recently about homelessness in Cape Town, and I can't find it right now. I was trying to find it on Twitter. But the way they talk about the homeless, it was just kind of really devastating and dehumanizing. And I think those stories are very dangerous. And we have to kind of look at that as well, and how those stories shape the world as well.
Yeah, I think it's actually an important sub-narrative that I'd love to get into, is the damage of telling bad stories. And but before we go there, just a question actually for both of you. But I'm going to start with you, Lauren. I mean, do you have perspective to those of us in the community that potentially are not natural storytellers? We're entrepreneurs. By virtue of being an entrepreneur, I believe that every entrepreneur is creative. In fact, every human is creative. I mean, but entrepreneurs are particularly creative because we're creating something out of nothing, and we're creating not only painting on the canvas, but we're creating the canvas upon which we're painting. So, I mean, do you have perspective for those of us who have this limiting self-belief of not being creative?
Well, with storytellers in our everyday life, the conversations we have, you tell someone about what happened to you at lunchtime, or a meeting that you had, or, your kid tells you about their day at school. Like, that's already storytelling. We already have this. It's innate. It's just trying to find ways and practicing ways of, finding a compelling way of telling a story without it degenerating into total bullshit. Because, of course, you do have the other side of it as well. Fair enough, where the stories were bigger than the actual product. So I think it's really just kind of finding a way of bridging that line between something which is really compelling but also true. And I don't mean true as in it feels true to you. I mean true as in actually there's factual evidence to support it. This business model will work. That maybe you do owe someone an apology in your personal life, whatever it is. I think we need to be conscientious, and I think we need to be curious, and really kind of interrogate where we're coming from and what we're trying to do with the story that we're telling.
Theranos kind of made a great story at the end of it in the documentary.
The Netflix was fantastic.
In the documentary version. It's kind of a kind of story that you'd love to write at some point, Lauren.
No, there's not enough supernatural murder. Sorry.
You need to add that in there. But I mean, from your side of thing, I mean, if I'm in business and I'm an entrepreneur or a leader in some way, shape, or form of an organization, I mean, what perspective do you have for me as somebody who doesn't believe that I'm a storyteller?
Well, I can totally agree with Lauren there. You are a storyteller. Everybody's storytellers. You tell stories all the time. When you get back from work, you say how the day went, and that's a story. So stories, luckily, there's been so much research and method and writing about it that they have a structure. And once you know that structure, you can use that structure and then tell your business's story within that structure. So the most basic structure of a story is there's a couple, but one is like saying a character who overcomes conflict to get something that they want, right? So there's somebody, there's conflict, there's something that they want. It's like 3 stages. The writer of The Wild, that's a beautiful movie with, what's her name? Reese Witherspoon, wasn't it? I think. And she says, Cheryl Strayed was the writer, and she said, story's got 3 parts. It's sorrow, redemption, and joy. Right? And that's like an easy business story. Like, what's the sorrow? What's the problem? What's the tool that you're giving to solve that story, to solve that sorrow, to redeem that story? What's the conflict? And then how are you overcoming it? And then what's the end narrative? So it's really simple. When you start breaking it down like that into those parts, and that's where you start, and the more you practice telling stories, the better you get at telling stories.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it's one of those things. I write a weekly newsletter, and it's hard. It's hard to do because sometimes it's difficult to kind of find the time to do it and whatnot. But it's just as you get into the rhythm and you do it over and over again. I mean, well, people tell me it's getting better, so I'm happy to say that. But it's still hard, though, right? Yeah, you just keep doing it, and I think as you get better, you start to realize the tiny little nuances, the little turns of the dial that add to the engageability, if that's even a word, that your storytelling elicits within your audience. So there's a couple of questions. Again, I'm juggling from the online audience. Thanks for the questions, guys. And I want to open it up to the in-person audience. If you do have a question, just raise your hand. Tiffany Markman, you have the first shot. We're going to hand you a mic if that's cool. Maurice is going to hand you a mic, and then can you state your name and your Twitter handle? Jokes, I'm just kidding. You don't have to. It's not working, Paul and Nico. It should be working now. Hello. You got to switch it on. Is this thing on? That's like the calling cry of COVID.
Hello. That's on.
There we go.
Hi, everyone. I have a question for both of our panelists. Pierre, I'm going to ask you first. So you said everyone is a storyteller. And I agree with you, except that not everyone is a good storyteller. Some people are cuck storytellers. And I know this because I'm a writer, so I work with cuck stories for a living. What I want to know is, what is a tip from both of our experts for admittedly cuck non-writers to be better storytellers? So what is the one thing they could change that would take those cuck stories and make them better stories?
By the way, I'm just going to interject here and say Tiffany's being super modest. She's a freaking great storyteller, and I do encourage everybody to follow Tiffany on socials. She's amazing. She's cocky and feisty and just awesome. So, anyway, over to you, Pierre.
Sure, that's a really good question. Yeah, no pressure. Like, for me, I mean, the challenge with the story is always that characters tend to want to live on a couch. Like, we all do, right? So, if we had a way, it'd be like Netflix and carbs. Not even like Netflix and chill. Like Netflix and carbs, right? So, the thing is, like, you always have to sort of throw stuff into your character's way to get them moving. And that for me is like, what can I do to this character so that they'll move? Like, what's the problem? What's the conflict? What's the drama? What's the thing that's happening in their lives that'll move the story forward? How do I open that, what is called technically like a tension gap or a story gap? So you create this conflict, and then now that has to be resolved. So it's that idea. But like, as an entrepreneur or as a business owner, like, there's something that I've learned in the last year or so is to stop thinking about what I can do and who can I employ. Right? If I know that I'm a cuck storyteller, then I can employ a good one. Right? Like, maybe that's the answer. Like that's the way you scale. Like, not by doing everything yourself and figuring out how you can really be the best at everything. It's about figuring out who can you bring onto your team.
Yeah. If you're really bad at it, don't do it so much, I don't know. Lauren, do you have perspective on that?
So the first thing you need is a point of view. You need to really know where you're coming from. If you're writing fiction, then you need to understand who that character is. I haven't written a lot of business reports, but I think your point of view is, kind of what you're wanting to achieve, who you are, why you're involved in this business, and what you're trying to say. Don't just ramble. And clarity and brevity is so important. You don't need to use long words. Exquisite vocabulary is really just useless. You want to, especially if it gets in the way of a point that you're trying to make. You want to keep it clean. You want to keep it clear. You want to keep it moving. And just cut everything which is unnecessary. It's something my editor tells me all the time. She's like, how many adjectives do you have here? She's like, pick one. And that's kind of my advice, to pick one.
So there's a story here from Sophia Dauer. Hi, Sophia, from the online audience. And Sophia asks, well, she says it's often easier for high-end brands to tell fun, short stories about cool things. Telling the harder, less palatable stories is far more difficult. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Short answer. Next question. I'm sticking with that. Okay, we have more questions in the audience. Okay, so.
Hi, my question is mainly for Lauren, but Pierre as well. Hey, Lauren, it's Daniel. It's a question about the exportability of South Africa. I know that a lot of your early works were sort of set here and more sort of South Africa-centric. And then you moved away, became quite American. I know in your last novel, it's set in America, but there's a South African character. As a creative who's had some horrendously unsuccessful experience trying to sell South African stories to internationals, is that a business decision of yours? Is it just easier to sell them? Is it where your head's at? Like, can you just say a little bit about trying to sell South African stories?
Yeah, it's a nightmare. It's really hard. Americans in particular, American watchers, viewers, Americans want to hear stories about America. And England, I think, is kind of very similar, that people are quite insular, and I think this comes down to nationalism and tribalism, and that's kind of just who we are. We like to hear stories about ourselves. I didn't decide to write The Shining Girls as an American story as kind of some very savvy business decision. It just turned out to be that way. I wanted to write a book about a time-traveling serial killer, and I wanted to look at the 20th century. So it wouldn't be Bill and Ted's excellent killing spree through time, from the Stone Age to the year 3000. But I wanted to look at kind of how the 20th century has shaped us, the mistakes that have come up again and again, that we keep making, kind of the loops and tangles and snarls of history. And if I'd set that story in South Africa, it would have been by necessity an apartheid story. And I write about apartheid a lot, but allegorically. It's deep in Zoo City, it's deep in Mossieland. It's something I'm very, very interested in. But I didn't want to write this as an apartheid story. I didn't want it to be, because then obviously the story would have had to become about trying to overthrow apartheid and end apartheid early and make it an alternative history. And that's not what I wanted to do with this book. I wanted to look at violence against women. I wanted to look at the 20th century and how we've evolved. So, yeah, it just happened to set in America because I lived in Chicago for a period of 6 months. And I went back there and I did a research trip. And then the second book, the publisher asked me specifically for another American story. And Detroit was a way of writing about Johannesburg. Broken Monsters is set in Detroit. It feels very similar to Johannesburg and Hillbrow in particular. And the stories that people tell about Detroit, which are the same as the stories people tell about Hillbrow, oh my God, it's so screwed up, and white flight has just devastated the neighborhood, and look at what these people are doing here, when actually these are vital and alive neighborhoods. And just because, there has been white flight or white people have moved out doesn't mean it's a ruined place. There are people who, a lot of university students who live in Hillbrow. In Detroit, there is an incredible art scene. And I wanted to get under the skin of these easy stories. Yes, trying to sell South African stories out in the world is difficult. I think we've had some success. Sono's been doing very well. Blood and Water on Netflix has been doing great. There's another brand new Netflix South African show. I can't remember the name, but it looks fantastic. And I think there is a wider audience, I think especially in countries like Nigeria, and if we sell to the rest of Africa. But it's always going to be a tough sell because countries are insular. America and England and the West want to hear stories about the West. Or they want a fictional Wakanda.
I was actually in the States when Black Panther came out. It was wild. I mean, you've never seen so much hype, and I mean, it was fantastic, But there's a question from the audience, from the online audience, from Fabian first. Hola, Fabian. And Fabian's question is, do you need a big budget to get your story out there? And I suppose, from a business perspective, it's kind of a trick question, really, because you come up with a story, do you amplify it? When you tell stories at CoachPit, for example, how do you get it out there?
Luckily, we all have a little megaphone in our pockets, so there's ways to tell stories as long as you've got a good one, and then people will gravitate to it because that's what people do. People like good stories. So there are ways to tell stories in a cheap way, and there's ways to tell stories in an expensive way. You have to choose your poison, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think you do have examples where stories naturally just they travel, right? Almost like Lauren's character in the Shining Girls. It just goes through these loops, and it's like magic. It just kind of it goes into all the various communities and so on and so forth. I remember a friend of mine in a creative agency, a guy called Justin Gomes, one of the top creatives in the country. He created an advertising campaign. I think it was for a condom ad, and it was literally a little video that he did on the fly with his team, and they created some funny videos. And these videos, because it was a great story, they were seen tens of millions of times, and funny, they didn't actually result much in the sale of the brand itself, but the story itself flew. So I think the budget question is a good one, but it's definitely a good story will travel. It takes on a life of its own. So I see there's a couple of audience questions. Yes, sir. We're going to hand you a mic.
So we're kind of living in what often feels to me like a really complicated world, right? Which probably is. Where one day it's 150 characters and the next day it's 20,000 words. And where the complexity comes in for me is, as brands, so I'm in education, right? I'm a brand manager in education. And one of my biggest struggles is trying to tell really interesting stories about why you should be educated. Because whether I'm speaking to a 19-year-old or their 55-year-old parent, I have to find a middle ground. Because from a budgetary perspective, I can't speak to everyone all the time. And I have to choose my stories carefully, and I've got these different windows that I have to chase where the thing that potentially brings you in to our institution and into the programs could be price one day, could be necessity the next day. So, for example, last year, a lot more young people went into postgraduate education. And I come from education in the design fields, right, where traditionally postgrad is not something you run towards. So last year the story was actually quite easy. It's COVID, it's lockdown restrictions, there's not a lot of work. Do an honors. So they come and they do an honors. But in regular time, especially in the design and the creative industries, innovation industries, you do your undergrad, you can pretty much find work, right? And you can be active as an entrepreneur or someone working within an organization. So how do we, and it's an unfair question, but how do we get to that place where we can tell better stories, especially about products that you can't buy every day? I used to work in the alcohol sector, where you've got something you sell every day that people want. The story's a lot easier, right? You don't really have to think too hard. When you've got something that's quote-unquote niche, because education, especially at tertiary education, is something you invest in. And I've got to make you part with that money, but sell you value. And I think that's really where my question is leading to is, how do I not lie to you or tell you, and when I say lies, because institutions like cars will tell you, hey, I can do this better than this person. But can I really? But how do I convince you of the value?
For me, so a story is about a character wants something. Right? So at any point in a story, in any story, if you think about any movie that you've ever watched in your entire life, at any point in that movie, you have to answer three questions. Who is this character? What do they want? And what is in their way? Right? So if you can't answer those questions, it's a stupid story. It becomes difficult for the viewer to keep on paying attention if they don't know the answer to those 2-3 questions at any point during that story. So, and you have to ask the same question about your character. So your character is not you. And that's the biggest thing. It's not the business is not the character. The character is the customer, the person you're seeking to serve. Right. So that's like the way Seth Godin puts it, the person you seek to serve. So that's your customer. So what do they want? So what do they really want? Deep in their gut, what do they want? And then what's in their way? And if you can answer those two questions and truly answer them, then you can build a campaign from there. But if you haven't done the work to answer those two questions properly, you won't be able to. You're just going to lower your price because that's the easy way out.
Thank you. That's a very nice answer. To admittedly a difficult question, but I want to just take a bit of a left turn because with Lauren, you have, I mean, you have this ability with words, which is just extraordinary, and it's part of what makes your book so enjoyable, where you seem to be having fun with words and with grammar and with mixing things up and creating almost like visual imagery that's new and exciting. And I mean, I still remember the first page of Zoo City where you talk about the furry comma. I think it's the sloth. That's kind of that's curled up like a furry comma, and it's just all these little nuggets and so on. So clearly you have the gift of the flow and the narrative, but I guess I suppose I want to ask the question that I'm sorry if you asked this about a million times before, but how do you come up with the ideas, the actual ideas? And I think every famous author does get asked this, but then how, with those ideas, do you choose the one that you're going to invest all this disproportionate amount of time, effort, energy, and blood into?
So I think this comes down to being curious about the world, engaging, kind of paying attention to things. And to the previous question, I think one of the things storytelling has to do is be in conversation with the world. So I think stories that are powerful, that kind of grip people's imagination. Humor works very well, obviously, as we've seen with Nando's. But also, Pierre, you were talking about, what's getting in the way. I'm like, well, what if I just want toilet paper? How do I choose one brand over the other? And there have been a lot of ads in the UK recently for a toilet paper brand, which is bamboo, and it's very environmentally friendly. And so it is also being aware of what's happening in the world and kind of relating to that and being in conversation with that. In terms of ideas, it's really just everywhere. I pick them up like stompies. And it's, I think I have some kind of terrible, other people have a memory palace. I have a hoarder house in the back of my head where everything is just kind of lumped together in weird boxes. And occasionally I'll go back there and kind of rifle through them and see what's in there. But yeah, I was a journalist for a very long time, and that taught me to observe details, and it taught me an ear for dialogue. It meant that I spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours writing transcripts of interviews and being able to hear how people speak and think differently. But also trying to find the salient details and trying to find the things that the images that you can hang something on. So, and then I also spent a long time in kids animation and script writing. And when you're working in animation, you've got to write something very clearly so that someone can draw it. And it's not just the background, it's also the action. How is that character reacting? What is the expression on their face? And you have to be so very clear because some poor boss is going to have to draw it. And if you haven't explained it clearly enough, she's going to have to redraw it. And being in the animation studio with the animators and seeing what they went through, if you weren't clear in your communications and you weren't very specific, you couldn't explain yourself, was such an incredible training ground.
Thank you. I think, jeepers. I think if we look at this thing of choosing the right story, it's almost the difference between, I can't remember who it was, I think it might have been Rich Mulholland who said, it's the difference between a leader and a manager. So a leader can tell a good story, because it's so much more powerful in terms of being able to convey the message that you want to convey. And I want to ask you, Pierre, what is the damage of telling a bad story? What happens if you just get it so wrong?
Well, I suppose this is my philosophical side, which is the definition of bad. But if you're telling a bad story, like Lauren pointed out earlier, that lead people to a bad place. That's an obvious, fake news kind of story or conspiracy theories. That's a bad story in one way. And if you're telling a bad story that just doesn't resonate with your customer in a business, that will lead to the end of your business. That's as simple as that. So And bad stories can have very bad effects, depending on your point of view.
We've got a couple of hands up in the audience. One question.
Can I jump in?
Sorry, yes, please, go for it.
So I think what you have to keep in mind, so it's about books, but it's also about stories. When you write a book, people have a very strong reaction to it, and sometimes people come up to me and they think they know me because they have a relationship with the book. But the relationship is not actually between the storyteller and the reader or the listener. It is between the story and the listener. Because when you tell a story, you are meeting someone where they are, and they are bringing all of who they are to that story. It is an incredible empathy engine, and the way people, you might tell the same story to 5 different people, and they will come out of it with different nuances and different understanding. And I think that's so important. If you're looking at storytelling in kind of business or even in your own life, is to understand where people are meeting you.
I love that, an empathy engine. That's such a powerful term. Thank you for that, Lauren. Okay, so we've got another question at the back there.
So just for context, I work in the enterprise development space, and I think I've seen stories being told in two kind of perspectives. So the first is the entrepreneur themselves, especially when they pitch and they want to try to tell stories about how they made it and what inspired their business. And my observation now for almost 7 years I've been in there is that entrepreneurs can be pretty great liars at the end of the day. And when you do the due diligence, you find that some facts have been bended a bit for whatever reason. And I don't think it's malicious. Sometimes it's just the pressure of trying to sell the potential of what they're trying to do. Then the other side is the incubators themselves, where they tell stories about the entrepreneurs. And sometimes my observation has been some incubators or programs tell good stories about the entrepreneurs that are not necessarily true, that then sets the entrepreneur up for failure, because the entrepreneurs now try to match to the story that has been in the media or all of that. So then the question to the two guests would be, have you been in a position where you had to misrepresent facts about your own story because of some reason, and how did you deal with that? And how do you balance between telling a great story but remaining true to the actual facts on the ground?
Sure, that's a great question. Lauren, do you want to crack on with that? Pierre's throwing you a hospital pass. Give it live.
Oh, I'm a terrible liar. My kid busts me all the time. It's the worst. I can lie on the page, but I cannot lie in real life. I think, the problem is coming down to personal integrity. And I think there is intense pressure, maybe especially in business. Again, I'm not a business person, so I don't know. But to kind of build up hype and to sell yourself, and that you could very easily get into kind of overhyping and fabrication, which of course is exactly what happened with Theranos. And then you kind of double down. But I think, I don't know how to avoid that. I don't know how to be able to see through that. I think it's really, again, coming back to curiosity, engagement, to keep checking in on things. And, there are a lot of really slick salespeople out there who, are selling snake oil or Trumpism or anti-vax conspiracy. And I think you just want to be really aware.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. Like, don't lie. Like, your mother taught you that. Like, this is not like, it's not good. And I've had this experience with businesses that I've worked with where I've had like very tense meetings, like high-level meetings, going, you are taking that landing page down because that is not true. Like, it's simply not true. It maybe has a grain of truth, like there's something to it, and it sounds sexy, but it's not the truth. And in the end, in the society, people's bullshit detectors are like at an all-time high. So if you are selling them snake oil, like Lauren said, then sooner or later they're going to find out. And then you just, how does that help you in the long term as an entrepreneur to do that? Like, it makes zero sense to me. Rather under-promise and then over-deliver. Then, that's like a classic axiom. Rather do that than over-promise and you can't keep your promise. Like, that's the basis of marketing. Marketing is you make a promise, and then business is you keep the promise. Like, so that's it.
I think it also comes down to I think it also comes down to what we owe each other. So I think we have to be responsible to each other in a society, and we have to act that we are in a society, which of course speaks to Ubuntu principles. So act with integrity and, do something because it has meaning, because it connects with other people.
I just want to add to what Lauren and Pierre are saying is that, if you think about the state, the zeitgeist of now, we're sitting in, what psychology today calls an anxiety pandemic. And part of the reason why, I go to a therapist once a month, and one of the things that you always deal with as an entrepreneur is anxiety, right? And I think anxiety, according to me, a psychologist, is the natural and inevitable result of the gap between your true self and your false self. The false self is essentially, often in the case, the story that you tell, that you project, and the bigger the gap is, the higher your anxiety will be. So if you project a story that's, my startup is this big and it's amazing, or I am this talented and this, successful, and if it's not true, that inner child, I suppose, that person that represents the truth inside of you, is going to feel very uncomfortable, and it's not sustainable, and that anxiety is going to spill over into the natural effects of your business, and you're going to get stuck, and you will.
Sorry, Fred, I do.
Yeah, go for it.
I do want to interject there because as someone with high anxiety myself, it's not because there's a fundamental mistruth inherent in me. It's because the world is terrifying. And I think especially if you are an incredibly compassionate person and you do engage with the world on a very intense level, which a lot of artists do, that you are going to feel it more intensely. So I don't want people to understand anxiety as being kind of like this misrepresentation or this kind of gap between your false self and your true self, and that you're actually doing something wrong. Anxiety is a mental health problem that a lot of us have. And therapy is absolutely the way to go, and medication is absolutely the way to go as well.
Sure. Just to clarify, I think that's one of, just to be clear, that's one of the sort of causes, and it's not the one cause. But I think it is certainly something from a business perspective that, as we've alluded to, don't lie. I think it's probably that you will get found out, particularly in this environment. So we've got, there's still a couple of questions coming through from the audience, and we've got a bunch from the online audience, and I've got a ton of questions. So it's going to be difficult to choose, but I want to quickly, before we open it up to the audience here, I want to just mention that if we can get to some practical elements of storytelling, like, is there some sort of a framework that you could suggest, Pierre, to the entrepreneurs here that they could follow in terms of a way of thinking from a business perspective, I guess?
So let me tell you a story. So the other day, I sent a parcel, and the parcel got lost, so it didn't get delivered. So now there's a helpline. So I called the helpline, right? So as the character in the story, what do I want? Right? I want to know where my parcel is, right? So the call answers, and it's this voice recording, and it tells me that they have been serving South Africa since 1985, and they have 3,000 outlets, and they've got so many employees, and a website where I can do this and that. And I'm going, all I want is to know where my bloody parcel is, right? So the biggest tip, and this is for like 90% of the businesses, is like when you go through all of your marketing, just ask the question, who is the hero in this story? I don't care that you've been here since 1985. Like, that's a stupid date anyway. If it's 1885, then maybe that's a cool story. But like, that's this album release date. It's not even like a real date. So go through your marketing and ask, who is the hero of the story? Is it the customer or is it you? And you'll be surprised how often it's you. Because of how awesome you are, how big you are, how many awards you've won, how many this, how many that. Nobody cares. They want to solve their problem. Like, because we're selfish people. So we are the hero in our own stories. So that's the first thing. Unless, and this is something that I've sort of changed my mind about recently, is like, unless you're a luxury brand. Now, everybody likes to think they're luxury brands, right? But if you think you are, most probably you're not. So, unless you're a luxury brand, and like this means like really luxury brand, like Jan, or like that sort of level, then it changes. Then you are inviting people into your story. Then you're the artist. Like, an artist doesn't care about the need of the people. I can guarantee you Tom Ford doesn't sit down and go, I wonder what people really want. Like, he doesn't care. He's inviting you into his story, right, into what the world that he's creating. And the same with Jan, and the same with all these kind of big houses. But most of us are not there. Right? Unless, if you're there, then that's great. But like, most of us are not. So then go through your marketing, go through your story, and go, how many times am I talking about the person I'm seeking to serve? How am I entering their story? So that's my kind of best bit.
Lauren, do you have anything to add to it?
If I can jump in there as well, I think sometimes you don't need a damn story. I think sometimes you just want your parcel, sometimes you just want toilet paper. And I think we have, there might be the risk of overemphasizing how important the story is. Sometimes you need action and you need service and you need efficiency. And that can be part of your brand story, but, I think we don't need to overthink this in kind of painful ways.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of business so-called luminaries who've I think, echoed that. Is like, Apple's story wouldn't be a great story if their products were not great. So do a good job with your product, and that's pretty much a big part of the battle that's won. And sometimes then the story will emerge from your community, I guess. Are there any more questions from this audience? There's one question there.
At what stage in the creative process do you realize that your story is good and worth pursuing?
Lauren, do you want to give that a crack?
You go through, it's a roller coaster. It's a very unpleasant roller coaster. I do love roller coasters, but this is not a nice one. Where today it'll be amazing. You're like, my God, this is incredible. The Booker Prize awaits me. And the next day you're like, oh my God, what a pile of garbage. And I think this comes back to something I wanted to say actually in the beginning is part of your process, I think, is giving yourself permission to suck. And to put out a first draft, which is a hot hellfire mess. But as soon as you've got that dog vomit in front of you, you can start sifting through and like find the good stuff in there and kind of get the shape of what you want and figure out how to build the story from there. So you have to give yourself permission to suck. You have to get over your inner critic. You have to get the work out. It's pointless having, a paragraph of a short story or the first 30 pages of a novel because that's nothing. You can't sell that. It's not a story. It's not complete. So finish your shit. And then try to figure out how to make it better. I did also want to add that there's a wonderful resource, which I'm not sure, it's about storytelling in general, by Chuck Wendig. It's called Damn Fine Story. And he's a fantastic writer, very much in terms of the mold of Stephen King. And he just he's been part of the storytelling family. His dad was a big hunter and told all these stories throughout American, but I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff there. It's very engaging, and it's a wonderful book that I would recommend.
So, I don't know if you want to add to that, Pierre?
Well, I don't know. I keep on sort of picking away, and this is like very subjective. So I keep on picking away at a story or a presentation or a talk, whatever, until I'm excited enough to go, I have to tell someone. Like, I have to tell somebody about this. Like, it's There's like there's a jewel that I found. And then sometimes I tell somebody and they go, that's stupid. But, that's also part of the process and you go back. But it's that sort of, when I feel that level of excitement that I can sense, like there's something here, there's a gift, then I feel like I've reached something, found something. That's good enough.
Okay, so we've got a question, also a community question. Can you share any hacks or strategies that you found helpful in your own storytelling? I don't know if you want to kick off with sharing some of your secrets, Lauren.
Finish your stuff. try not to ramble too much, which is something I do. Sometimes like the diversions are really interesting and fun. But try to be clear to the point, find the narrative thread. But also, I think if I'm talking about writing fiction, there's a magic moment for me where there's a subconscious process which takes over. So I'll have an idea of what the character's going to do in my head, but in the moment before my fingers hit the keyboard, something changes. And I find myself writing something different. And it is just the magic of allowing your brain to play and to flow and to see where things go and to see what emerges is so very exciting. But I think that also means you have to give yourself permission to suck, give yourself permission to be bored. Another friend of mine says if he starts every day facing the page with forgiveness for what he didn't do yesterday, what he screwed up yesterday, maybe he could have written 500 words more. So I think just start with forgiveness, start with clarity, start with curiosity.
Thanks, Lauren. We have another question for Pierre. Who are the heroes and villains in a business story?
The hero is most of the time your customer, almost all the time your customer, every time your customer. And the villain is whatever they're facing, not what you're facing, what they're facing. So that's the simplest way to structure that. Unless you're not that type of business, but most of the time you are. So the hero is always the customer, it's not you. So I'm glad you mentioned Asterix and Obelix. So the customer is Asterix, you are Get the Fix. Right, you give the magic potion, that's who you are. You're not Asterix.
I think it's a really good place to close on, guys. We've run out of time, and I think this has been an absolutely scintillating discussion with two very, very, very talented individuals. And I just want to really thank you both, Lauren and Pierre, for your time. And if we and those of you in the online audience could just kind of, I don't know, tap your keyboard or something, just give our two members a rousing applause. Thank you, Lauren. And thank you, Pierre. And Lauren, we are so excited for you. And this is just incredible. And everybody, online and in person here, please do go and swarm Apple Plus next week Friday. And just tweet about it, share about it, make a big noise, and really support Lauren, one of our own, and just doing something incredible.
It's also really good, so please watch it because it's good.
It's also really good, yes. Thank you. And also to Pierre, please subscribe to Pierre's Daily Mailer. It is also really good. And thank you guys for sharing some of your dark secrets with us as entrepreneurs. And thank you guys in the audience for coming on a crisp autumn Joburg evening to come and join us. I hope you'll stick around for a little bit and meet each other. And I mean, this is where the magic happens, where you interact and you share stories and ask the hard questions of each other and support each other in this journey. And thank you for everybody online who've been joining us. And just subscribe to heavychef.com, guys. It's super easy. Just go and check it out, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Pierre. Thank you, guys. Take care.
A 1, 2, 3. is a journey. We are all traveling. Kure kwanda kabai koi, here I have been traveling. Life is a journey. We are still traveling. Kure kwandi koi, we are all still traveling. Kanango mayorirana so terera iwe Voda izirango menna so pembera Upenye udukudu kumwanawe Break a leg my friend Kanango mayorirana so terera Kanango mayorirana so terera iwe Voda izirango menna so pembera Upenye udukudu kumwanawe Break a leg, my friend. Can I go my yorira not so terera? Life is a journey. Yeah, we are all traveling. Good wonder, koi. Here I have been traveling. Oh, life is a journey. We are still traveling. Kure kwatino and I go, yeah, we're all still traveling. Kanango mayorira na so terera iwe, voda izirango menna so pembera iwe. Upenye udo kudu kumwana we, break a leg my friend. Kanango mayorira na so terera iwe. Kanango mayorira na so terera iwe. Oda izirango menna so pembera. Upenye udu kudu kumwanawe. Break a leg my friend. Kanango mayorira na so terera iwe. I have been traveling. We're still all traveling. Yes, I have been traveling.